Hello and welcome. My name is Thomas Kevin Dolan, the author and writer of my memoir, Little Fag, A Journey of Self-Acceptance and Healing. Today I'll read chapter 2 of the 5th section of my book. It begins on page 307, and the title of the chapter is Heeding the Call. This dream, now a reality, was always with me. It never dawned on me not to trust it. The familiarity of what seemed like the ancientness of Hawaii was a powerful partner for me. It felt like a lifetime before, the one in which I was a closeted married man. But even then, my wife and I had honeymooned in Hawaii. I remember standing alone late at night on a beach in Maui. The sands were drawn back into the ocean with each wave, and it felt like I'd go with them. Even though my wife and I had walked that beach nightly, I wanted to be there alone. It wasn't just the waves that drew me in. Each breeze, while on Maui, whispered for me to stay. Each, it seemed, was a messenger from beyond. My job, in hindsight, was to welcome them. I could feel Maui call to me. What I braved. I had no idea that the success of my journey involving healing my life because of the influence of alcohol began when I joined an ACOA program at a meeting that they had in early 1990. I had no experience with any other program that would help me deal with emotional sobriety. In fact, I'd never heard of that before. But with the Adult Children of Alcoholics program, ACOA, when I learned that emotional sobriety was the focus of the program, it really got my attention. It might have saved my life, literally. I knew the feelings of being out of control a lot of the time, unable to think clearly. My mind went 100 kilometers an hour. Sleep constantly eluded me, and the darkness was terrifying. Fear ruled my heart and mind. There was little light to walk towards. I had no idea how to sit with my feelings. I used distraction, mostly sex, to numb myself when I felt uneasy. Cracking open an understanding that I was dealing with emotional intoxication made sense. I was exhausted from living that way. My therapy work was grounded in the discipline of being able to recognize my feelings, stay with them, and see if I could find the courage to name them. The biggest part of my journey to freeing myself was coming out of isolation and beginning to talk about the experience I had during my childhood. I felt so alone, but by finding others who were experiencing some level of success with the ACOA program, I began to see myself mirrored in them. I had found a community I could feel safe with. Even today, with the immense privilege, abundance, and love I have in my life, it is still vital that I lean on the wisdom of working a program and continuing to partner with God, my higher power, with support from fellow travelers. I must always remind myself that I'm not alone and I do not have to travel this path on my own. This newly formed family, one of choice, understands who I am. Most importantly, at least today, I'm learning to understand who I am. The practice most responsible for my healing is having learned to sit still with my feelings and allow everything to be as it is. I still have a therapist on speed dial. Perhaps I always will. As I continue to embrace and value my counseling and therapy work, the practice of reparenting myself gets a bit easier. I have a litany of mantras that speak words of encouragement to my vulnerable self. They support me in not getting too busy to avoid my feelings. I no longer walk around numb. I now sense I'm making it. What I braved was to remember that being alive comes with feelings, and my feelings, all of them, are okay. This rich life of emotional sobriety is one I've worked for and am entitled to. It has been my biggest claim in my life. The unlearning. While unmarried, with some clarity that one day we would be, my husband and I created an agreement that we would never ask the other to marry. There would be no bended knee ritual for us. The rationale was simple. At least it was to us. As little gay boys, we never thought about being married. It wasn't a privilege, nor was it a legal right for us, so neither of us knew much about the subject. The last thing we wanted to adopt was some heterosexist perspective that had one of us take a knee and offer a ring. There was also a US law that defined marriage as being between a woman and a man. The law was called the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA. And as long as it stood in the books, we had no chance of marriage in the United States. We sought the counsel of a New York nonprofit organization called Immigration Equality. They specialize in supporting American citizens, my partner, with relationships that involve a person from another country. In this case, me, from Canada. They called us a binational couple. Yet another label. Our attorney counseled us with some grim news at the time. He shared, "Thomas, there's no hope in hell as long as DOMA stands that you'll get into the US without being married." He added, "DOMA is being challenged at the Supreme Court level, and at some point in time, it will fall." I had learned growing up with my family that the world was out to get us. Mom at one point in time declared, "The universe is not very friendly." I had to do a lot of work to trust that in time I'd be able to marry Adam. The Hawaiian Islands had become a bastion of homophobic fervor dating back to the early 1990s when attempts were made to bring marriage equality into law. The Mormon Church was the strongest backer, ensuring marriage equality never happened. Adam happened to be visiting me in Vancouver in 2013, June of 2013. We awoke one morning to the news that DOMA had been struck down by the United States Supreme Court. Dressed in our hotel housecoats, after reading and listening to the news, we gently agreed that the time was right to begin a conversation about being married. We'd spent 2 years discussing the concept of what marriage meant, and from that understanding, we'd build a foundation of marriage sanctity that worked for us. We were married in Vancouver on February 20th, 2015. The US law would recognize our union, paving the way for me to move to Honolulu. Perhaps one of the scary moments for me, given the notion of me moving to the States, was a thought relative to my own security living in a foreign country. Edging into my thoughts of security was the dysfunction that alcoholism had leveled in my life. I'd learned to trust no one. Here I was agreeing not just to marriage, but to moving to the US. The alarm bells were ringing for me, and I wasn't sure I could convey to Adam the fear that was present for me. This caused me immense confusion. In a round of therapy that was insanely painful, I discovered that I had no experience of ever telling anyone that I was scared to trust. No Dolan had been asked about the impact of alcohol. I never asked. My siblings never asked. Friends never asked. My school system never asked. I understood how Mom felt that the universe was unfriendly. This dysfunction, because of alcoholism, had me experience mistrust at a level that felt insurmountable. Yet, it was now my responsibility to name this elephant in the room between Adam and myself. I had drawn to myself some powerful teachers, women and men who would gently instill and challenge some of these wonky dysfunctions without shaming me. I felt I could do this work with Adam. I wanted to control this dynamic of not trusting by pretending it didn't exist. I knew if I didn't feel it, I wouldn't heal it. So I invited Adam to Vancouver and then planned a weekend getaway so I could reveal what had come up for me. My work was to make sure I created the safest container for myself when I shared my issues around trust. It was up to me to help myself. By simply sharing with Adam that I wanted to let go of accusing my past of not being able to trust, I could begin to focus on myself and what I could do to continue to heal. Brene Brown says, "I know my life is better when I work from the assumption that everyone is doing the best they can. this bit of scientific research has helped me to loosen the ties that keep me bound to circumstances that couldn't have turned out differently. The gift I gave myself and Adam by naming my trust issues was my ability to create the possibility of limitless growth for both of us. That day, by naming the elephant in the room, my generational dysfunction about trust stopped at me. Adam held me gently and whispered, "All of what we possess will become ours. I'll help you take care of you and support you in taking care of yourself." The unlearning for me was letting go of the notion that the universe was not a friendly place. It was never my value. It belonged to my mom. Today, with my husband, we know the universe is a friendly place. Each of us takes 100% responsibility, his 100% and my 100% for our lives. I've let go of any blame that keeps me from experiencing trust, joy, transformation, and love in my life. I have found peace. Sharing this story with you around calling Adam to Vancouver, it kicked up a little dust for me, a little bit of anxiety, actually, as I shared that story with you. I remember being so scared, because essentially what I was going to say to him was, how do we combine the life you have and I have? How do we combine it together? And it would be the first time in my life I would enter into a relationship where the power dynamic for me was different. Previous relationships had me in a different financial position than my partner. Right, perhaps had me in other positions that were different than my partner. And I would use them as a power dynamic, right, to probably feel more powerful than them. And perhaps at times diminish the experience of what it is that they brought to the relationship. That was important for me at that time, because it was the only way I could manage the distrust, which ran as a foundational way of being for me, without ever saying to the partner at that time that it was my issue around trust, my lack of trust, not being able to trust myself. So of course, when we're not able to do that for ourselves, we actually can't do that for anybody else. So when I landed on this notion of sharing that truth with Adam and inviting him to Vancouver, we actually drove to Harrison Hot Springs for a weekend. And as we drove, as I began to kind of open up to him in terms of what it is that I wanted to talk about, even now, as I take a deep breath in sharing with you the details of that, I remembered a calmness. And I think the calmness came from the energy of trust from the universe that I was wanting to embrace, but I needed to find it within me first. And that obviously was my work. So as we got closer to the destination where I would reveal to Adam some bigger issues for me that were mine, and to be able to couch them in that framework, and they weren't his, to invite him to simply be listening to my stuff, it didn't feel daunting. It began to be less scary. And I think what I'd learned in the back and forth between Vancouver and Honolulu in falling in love with Adam was the foundation of respect that he had for himself, the level of new respect I found for myself. We could combine them and both realize that love wasn't the foundation of a relationship, respect was. And because it was so broad and so deep, we were able then to plunk love on top of it. And here I was, foundation of respect, love, I was going to plunk my issue, my lack of trust, on top of that, knowing that both of those levels of foundation can hold it, but certainly trusting that my now husband, my then partner, could also hold it. So I'm proud to have found the courage. And of course, it is only the vulnerable that can be courageous. I'm glad I did my work. And I'm most grateful for Adam not turning that bit of work into something about him. I shared with you what it is that he said, that his support has never wavered that it's been so powerful, and certainly so different than my family of origin, where in fact it didn't exist, right? I had no support. So as I share this story with you, which I think the main point through it is this notion of we've got to do our own work first. There's no way that I can expect anybody to trust me or me to have trust for anybody else until I have trust for myself. So where in your life might you be sitting wanting somebody to actually give you something when in fact it might really be work that you need to give yourself first? And in doing that, you'll begin to notice, I certainly did, as that trust increased, not only in my relationship with my partner at the time, my husband now, the trust in all of my other relationships also began to be bolstered. So it's not about doing all of this work with everybody. It's about doing this work with you, and then taking the work that you discover with you as a bit of an experiment and reaching out to somebody else and beginning to build it with them and for them, and then suddenly realize, wow, that thing that you're giving out is now being returned to you. And perhaps in some instances, trust from somebody might be returned to you, but you never requested trust from them. Our own individual foundation of trust is so strong that when we do that work, the trust from outside of us makes its way to us. So I'm so proud to have found the courage and the wherewithal to be so vulnerable with my husband to say, literally, here's my shit. You don't need to do anything with it other than listen. And ultimately, what I heard for him is, how can I support you?